Can I just start you with President Biden's speech? Was he right to imply that Afghani soldiers didn't have the guts to fight for their country?
Well, I think we have to go back to 2014, and you'll know very well, I think, that in 2014 the Afghans took on the combat mission and NATO essentially became the advisors to them rather than actually doing the fighting, although we continue to provide air support to them. And for 6 or 7 years they fought extraordinarily bravely. Thousands of them died fighting against what they thought were the enemy of their country. And I don't think we should ever forget that. That's really important.
But as you said, you fought in Afghanistan. You fought alongside Afghani soldiers. Many of them died. They invested in us, in our ideals, in the kind of nation we were trying to help them build. We said that time and time and time again. What are they supposed to think when they see the leader of the free world giving one might almost say a rather bitter speech saying, oh, well, they just didn't have the guts to fight for their country, or words to that effect?
I think we've got to really analyse why an army collapses like that. I mean, I think the most important point I'd make up front is that on the 4th of July, American forces effectively left Afghanistan. American air power, American intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance left Afghanistan. And of course, the Afghan security forces had depended hugely upon all of those capabilities in order to be able to conduct the fight they were doing. When you then add to it the way we military talk about fighting power, in other words, the fighting potential of an army, it's about the conceptual, the physical, but also about the moral. And of course, that was a morale-shattering moment when they realised they no longer had that level of support. And of course, when you then look at their chain of command and the extent to which that chain of command functioned effectively, you can see how it would be possible for them to collapse. And we've seen that many times in history before when armies implode because the moral component is absent.
If you think of the great intelligence failure since the Second World War, you might think of the collapse of South Vietnam, you might think of Iraq and the weapons of mass destruction that never existed. Would you agree that despite the millions and millions of pounds the British taxpayer has spent in Afghanistan, that this was an intelligence failure of equal standing? You just didn't see this coming?
I don't think we realised how fragile that Afghan army was. I don't think we realised perhaps how dysfunctional its government was at the time, and I don't think we realised quite what effect that very abrupt American withdrawal would have on them. I also think that there are some really important lessons to learn how you build the capacity of indigenous forces if we ever do that sort of thing again, because I think that you need to reflect really hard on whether you're trying to design something that is in the image of your own forces. Because when you're dealing with a country like Afghanistan, when you are dealing with people who essentially live in the tribal areas of Afghanistan and are then brought into an army, there's always a question about how they are going to want to be organised, how they're going to want to fight, and whether our systems are the best systems to give them. And I think there's some really profound questions that need to be asked about how you do that sort of thing in the future, and what systems you put in place to enable them to be sustainable. That's the key question that has to be asked.
I used the word failure, you didn't, but would you agree that historians are likely to conclude this whole episode, intelligence, military, was a colossal failure in the end?
Well, as you know as well as I do, it's very dangerous to write history whilst the thing is still going on.
But we have to try.
And I think that we have to be patient. I think we have to wait and see how this happens. I mean, we need to understand what the Taliban is. We need to understand that it may well be that the Taliban Political Commission, which is now in Afghanistan, they arrived yesterday, they are talking to President Karzai and to Dr. Abdullah, and there are meetings going on as I speak to see how they can form a government. Let's see whether the talk that we're hearing from them is represented in the walk that you see on the ground. We of course have to recognise that there are renegade elements who will behave badly under any set of circumstances. But we need to remember that, as President Karzai put it to me yesterday, these are country boys. And they are people who live by a code of honour which you and I would never understand, but which perhaps goes back thousands of years. And what's going to happen is that the application of that code of honour is going to be applied to the country. And we need to see what happens. We need to give them a bit of space, I think, to see whether or not they are going to govern in a less repressive and in a more reasonable way and a more inclusive way. And it may be that they will.
A lot of people will just view that with, you know, you're a very diplomatic man, and people are going to say, well, what else could you say you're not going to say this was a catastrophe from beginning to end? But would you understand why many people are just highly sceptical of the idea that the Taliban could possibly have changed?
Absolutely, I understand that. It is entirely right for us to be extremely suspicious and to go on what evidence we've got. But again, we would also be silly, I think, if we didn't give them a chance, whilst making it very clear to them that there are certain things that we absolutely will not tolerate. You know, relationships with international terrorists, training camps for international terrorists to be exported abroad. These are all things we won't tolerate. And of course, we absolutely want to see the human rights of all Afghans respected in the way that they govern.
You say we won't tolerate it. Suppose they do go that route again. What are we going to do about it? We've just, we in America, in the most high-profile possible way, have just walked away from something. I mean, are you saying that it's possible we might go back in?
I think that all of the international community, and here I include Russia and China in this equation, not least the neighbours like India and Pakistan, they do not want to see terror being exported from Afghanistan. So we need to recognise this is an international problem, and we need to engage the Taliban internationally. We need to speak with a common voice. And if we do that as an international community, I think we'll find that the Taliban don't want to be a pariah state like they were in the past. They don't want to be a North Korea. They want international aid. They recognise that Afghanistan has got a massive humanitarian problem at the moment. Winter is coming. There are thousands and thousands of displaced people and refugees. They don't want their people to be dying in the cold. They want help. Let's see what happens. Let's exercise a bit of strategic patience and let's hold our nerve.
Couple more things briefly. Could you just talk us through the situation on the ground at the airport? Is it stable? Are you confident you'll get everyone that we would want to get out? What happens if people can't get to the airport? Presumably there's no possibility of going back into the city and getting anyone.
So at the moment what's happening is that we're collaborating with the Taliban on the ground. They're securing the environs of the airport. They're of course securing the city as well. People are able to come forward to the airport in order to be processed by our system. We are able to bring our aircraft in, and we are able to create that system that's necessary to evacuate people. Now, there are obviously threats to that. I think the first threat that bothers me most is whether or not a lot of very frightened and worried Afghans, again, trying to get over the fences into the airport, as we saw in those very troubling scenes over the weekend. That is a serious challenge for us if that happens again. And then the second risk that you're always going to have, I think, is a terrorist attack or maybe a renegade element getting out of control and making our life difficult. But subject to those two risks, I'm as confident as I can be on a daily basis that we are able to keep the thing running in a way that will evacuate people that we need to evacuate.
Can I just ask you finally, I've listened to your interview round this morning, and as I would have expected, you've been very diplomatic, and I understand your position is a complicated one, but not so much as a general, but as a man. Can I just ask you what you would say? You led troops in Afghanistan. You know what it looks like at the tough end. You know what it is to write to people who've lost loved ones or whose loved ones have been maimed. What would you say to them, human being to human being today, about the sacrifice they made or their relatives or loved ones made? Was it worth it? Can you really say that?
What I would say fundamentally is that I have a personal investment in all of those lives, either those that were lost or those who've become wounded. I'm the patron of a charity that cares for people like that. I really believe passionately in what they did. I believe that those people who died or who were wounded went to Afghanistan believing in what they were doing a job that they felt was an important job to do, doing it in a thoroughly brave and professional fashion. The British military was never defeated at the tactical level on the battlefield. We played that in a very impressive fashion. And I would say that that is the thing that matters most to me as a human being and as a military officer. It will be for others to judge at the political level whether this thing was worth it or not. But as a soldier, we are there to serve our country. We were sent there by a government that felt it was the right thing for us to do, and we fought very professionally for that cause. It's not for me to judge, I think, at the end of the day, in political terms, whether it was good or bad or whatever it might be, a success or a failure.
I think I'm just asking for some kind of, it's not your fault that you're Chief of the Defence Staff at a point where political decisions have led to the total humiliation of Britain and America on the world stage. I realise that's nothing to do with you, it's not your decision and you had nothing to do with it. But you fought there. You led men there, and I'm just asking you, I mean, what is your personal reaction? And if you were alone with their families today, what would you be saying? Disappointment? Shame? upset, anger, or just we did a job, it wasn't our decision to make in the end?
And I think, as I said in answer to the previous question, I feel distressed by it. I live, sympathise, empathise with everybody who fought there. And for me, personally, it is something that is distressing. I felt very strongly about what I was doing there personally. I felt I was trying to do the right thing. I felt I was doing it in a fashion that was professional and effective. And the fact that we've ended up where we've ended up is not what I would have hoped for at the time.
General, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us.